Hi and welcome back to another Onkruid video. Welcome to the second part of this series on the book Weg van het piekeren or Away from Worrying by Filip Raes, a Belgian clinical psychologist and cognitive behavioral therapist who kind of specialized into worrying, rumination and its role in anxiety and depression and all forms of psychopathology, if you will. Last episode we discussed the introductory chapter together, which mainly focused on that a lot of people worry, that it's not something unique, not something that is rare, but everybody worries to some extent. And it also introduced us a little bit already into the world of why we worry. And this chapter kind of builds more onto that. This chapter's title is Mensen veranderen niet, of toch maar een beetje. In English, people don't change. Or well, if they change, they only change a little bit. And in this chapter, Filip Raes kind of tells us about how it comes to pass that some people are more prone to be worrying persons and some people are less prone to it. Some people deal with situations otherwise in less of a manner of worrying. And people that are less prone to worrying might be more prone to dealing with situations in other manners, like actively setting behavior and doing things to actually reach the solution, reach their goals. And most of it comes down to, or a large part of it comes down to, like our nature, our temperament, our personality. And a large part of who you are, of your personality, of how your stance in life is, and also how you react to everything that comes on your path in life is already determined at birth, because a lot of that information and a lot of that pre-programming, if you will, is stored in your genes. And your genes is not your pants, it's your genes that you get from your parents and they got from their parents. It's the part of our human nature or the part of our human body that we inherit from others, and that makes it possible for heritability to be calculated and diseases to be inherited from generation to generation, but also things like personality traits. Rarely does a person's temperament or personality really drastically change. We get born with it and it kind of stays the same throughout our life. Of course, there is still an impact of what happens in your life. There's not just nature, there's also nurture, and they always go in interaction with each other. But your personality is kind of this cemented, rusted piece of you. Continually throughout your life, it kind of stays similar or the same. People that worry now, when they have become an adult, were probably not that optimistic or hopeful about the world when they were children. They weren't that exploring, they weren't that happy all the time. No, they were more prone to, even as a child already, be a bit more reluctant, be a bit more careful around anything, and be a bit more susceptible to negative feelings and thoughts. And you can't ask people to be less neurotic, right? You can't ask someone to be less extroverted, less happy in their life, less open, less optimistic. It's who they are and it's how they are. It's their fundamental way of being in the world. That's why, for example, when you ask somebody that is prone to being stressed, if you ask them hey, calm down a little bit, take it easy, most of the time that works aversively. And it puts more fuel on the fire and they become even less calm, more paranoid, more stressed. And stress is important in the story of worrying. The first subtitle of this chapter is Worrying and Stress, and it talks about how worrying and neuroticism are kind of a package deal. And worrying is an explaining factor, it's a mediating factor in why stress leads to chronic stress, anxiety problems, depressive problems, and also body problems like sleep or heart rate fluctuations, all those kinds of things. Worrying makes it so that your stress is elongated, that it stays active longer in your brain. It makes you hold your stress and not able to let your stress go. It makes the stress chronic, and that's dangerous. Worrying can kind of exhaust you both mentally and physically. And that's another example of where the body-mind connection is so beautifully illustrated, and the fact that it's more like one whole than two separate things that are connected. And boom, all of a sudden there are books behind me. It's the next day. The book includes a nice and clear little scheme, a little image on how all these factors come into play together. And it's basically a nice summary of what we have talked about so far, and some things that we are going to talk about are also included. What it basically is about is, and I'm drawing this with my mouse, which is insane because that's very hard. You have your genes, right? Those are the things that carry your genetic information. You get a lot of them from your parents and everyone else above you in your family tree. Your genes are a big factor in deciding or kind of determining how much neuroticism, how neurotic you are. So how much you are a bit scared, a bit more careful, a bit less open to new experience. That's all about neuroticism. And this determines, or partly this determines, how much you worry, right? So your genes, which you get from your parents, determine a part of your neuroticism, a part of it, because there's also nurture. This is just the nature part. And then that determines how much you worry, or partly determines how much you worry, because situational influences can also impact how much you worry. And social learning and stuff, for example, if you see your parents worry a lot, then you can also learn it from them without getting it from the genetic side of things. This is the vulnerability. The vulnerability side, you're vulnerable to being a worrier. But this entire model we're drawing here is a stress vulnerability model. So people with this vulnerability, they can still go through life fine, a-okay, they don't experience any problems. But if then stress gets added into the story, if these people experience a lot of stress, like this, they have a lot of stressful experiences in their life, stress can possibly lead to chronic stress, to bodily problems, to anxiety, and to depression. Those are all the things that stress can lead to. And this can happen in anyone, but what we know from research and what Filip Raes is telling us is exactly this. This arrow right here, that is like the most important arrow. And that is where the mediating factor of worrying comes in. That's why it can be an explaining factor in the relationship between stress and its relation to chronic stress, bodily problems, anxiety, depression. I'm gonna jump a little bit ahead of myself already, and that's something we're going to talk about later, but there's also something that can really diminish the probability of this relation becoming problematic, and that is social support, which I'm not going to write as an abbreviation because then that's going to be SS and we don't want that in our videos. I'm just going to write it like support, but remember that it is social support. And that is a very beneficial mediating factor that can diminish this relationship. It can slow it down. It can make it disappear even, so that you can deal with stress in an adaptive manner. But this is the kind of scheme that really summarizes this entire chapter beautifully. And so, as I told you, it's a stress vulnerability model. Some people have a certain vulnerability because of the levels of neuroticism in their genes, and they need less stress to actually experience pathology, to become ill, if you will. Other people are more resilient. They have less neuroticism from their genes, and they are more resilient to stress, so therefore the relationship between stress, chronic stress, bodily problems, anxiety and depression is not that prevalent in them. They don't experience that relationship. They just have stress for a second, but they can adaptively deal with it. The authors of this book conducted a little research with 700 young people here in the Flemish part of Belgium with questionnaires, and they noticed that people that worry on measurement moment 1 were more prone to having depressive feelings on measurement moment 2. Stressful experiences in their life, stressful situations on moment 1 also predicted depressive feelings in moment 2. And this was stronger for the people that experienced a lot of worrying in their life as well. So that basically like proves their scheme, right? Or well, it gives some hard evidence for it, because something is never completely proven. All the research can always come up, but you definitely know what I mean. It's not all negative. We don't have to be pessimistic about it all, because as I told you, social support can be a mediating factor in the positive, the optimistic way. It is a protective factor that protects us, or that buffers for psychopathology and for all different kinds of psychopathology, but also here for depression, anxiety, bodily problems, chronic stress following from regular old stressful experiences. If you have a stressful day at work, that can really cause you some harm to your sleep schedule. But if you can, for example, lay next to your partner who supports you, you might fall asleep a bit easier. Research shows that in postnatal depression, for example, people that have a lot of social support fare a lot better. Also, when Hurricane Katrina hit the world a while back, people that experienced more social support back then had less of an impact that they experienced because of Hurricane Katrina, less of a traumatic impact. And social support is such a helping factor because it is related to feelings of empathy. You feel like people are living with you, are trying to feel with you. Also feelings of safety and feelings of recognition. And of course, the scheme I showed you is a bit of an oversimplification, right? It's not just all that simple. There's, for example, also a direct arrow between stress and worrying. Something like a COVID pandemic, for example, is a stressful situation that can directly cause you to worry, but worrying can also give you stress. So there should be, for example, also a two-sided arrow in between worrying and stress in that scheme. But the author of this book, Filip Raes, tried to keep this scheme simple on purpose so that you can really remember the core elements in this story of worrying, stress, and chronic problems. So to basically summarize this first little subheader, worrying is kind of inside of you. An important engine for this worrying is neuroticism, and worrying makes you hold on to stress longer, which makes it possible that the stress transforms into chronic stress with all the negative effects that can bring with it. En nou de second little subheader of this chapter is waarom al die ellende, waarom al dat gepieker, or why will we go through all this hassle? Why do we worry? And we already talked about this a bit, of course. It's mostly an evolutionary explanation. In this chapter, the author kind of praises evolutionary theories, and he thinks that evolutionary psychology should be held way more in the should be put way more in the limelight. There should be a lot more attention to those theories because all of the time they are pretty much encompassing and they are also intuitively understandable. And they are simple, and simple theories are often the best theories if they can actually explain the reality, of course. And one of the main premises in evolution theory is, of course, Darwin's natural selection. Three things need to be in order for natural selection to work. There has to be some variety in between individuals and in between species. There have to be consequences related to this variety. So, for example, some people surviving better than others because of that variety. That's, of course, a very important consequence. And there has to be heritability. People that survive have to be able to give that variety, that little characteristic, that quirk that they have to the next generation. And for neuroticism, it's just the same. But only the things that bring us benefits in terms of survival or in terms of procreation, they actually get inherited into the next cycle, into the small little Christopher Paolini reference in there, into the next generation, right? So what is the benefit in neuroticism? And well, it's quite simple. The world was dangerous earlier. It was very dangerous. It still is now in some parts and in some ways, but earlier you really had to pay attention to not getting cursed by a mammoth, not touching a poisonous snake, not eating the bad plant, all those things, or just not going out when it's too cold, also going out for hunting, not going out when it's too cold, realizing to kind of go into your winter slumber a little bit. And all those things are, of course, done better most of the time by people with a high level of neuroticism because they are a bit more reluctant to do stuff. They are a bit more capable of reasoning about all those possibilities that would induce anxiety in other people. They already have that in their mind, like, oh, it's gonna get colder, so I have to stay inside, I have to buckle up real close. Or, oh, a big large mammoth, I should stay back. Somebody a bit more impulsive, a bit more extroverted, a bit more open might just take their spear and try to ram it into the mammoth's side and then just get a little kick and they fly through the air and they die. So neuroticism can help you survive. And some people score higher on neuroticism than others. The consequences are that those people often avoid danger, and that's why, because of heritability, those people survive more easily and they give that characteristic to the next generation. And we still have that today because evolution is a slow and blind process. It's a process you need to have a lot of patience with, and it's a process of trial and error. Right now, the ball is probably already rolling though. I believe that there are already some dynamics right there in our evolution process in our generation right now, where people that have less of this neuroticism might survive better in the world. People that are more extroverted, that dare things, that dare to speak up, to say out loud what they are thinking and not kind of lean back and kind of fall into themselves and just stay in the background. And it's another characteristic where there is variety in us humans. It has consequences and it is inheritable. Better safe than sorry. But I can hear you thinking like, how can neuroticism be beneficial to us because it makes us unhappy? That's what you tell us, right? It makes us reluctant, it makes us less eager to go out, and going out and social support is exactly what we need. So how can it be beneficial? It doesn't make us happy. Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but evolution and natural selection don't give a damn shit about happiness. They don't give a rat's ass about happiness. They care about survival. And as I told you, our alarm system, this neurotic alarm system, is a bit too sensitive in our day-to-day life nowadays. For example, also in social situations. There are two kinds of dying, is what the author of the book says. There's social dying and physical dying. Physical dying is the one we all know, where you actually just pass. You breathe your last breath and you head into the afterlife or get reincarnated as a little mouse, maybe, potentially. Any Buddhist people in here? Either way, a lone monkey is a dead monkey. We are very prone to be scared about being in a bad spotlight in the group, being shunned from the group, not being a vital part, a vital cog in the system of the group, not being well liked. And that's why in a potential social conflict, if somebody at your workplace or your school, for example, makes like this little underhanded remark at you, all of a sudden your stress system is active and you start worrying potentially. That's less adaptive towards the life that we live now, but it's just a remnant from past times. But instead of some underhanded remarks, if you get a compliment from someone you love, if you have someone near you that you love, if you have that social support we talked about already, then your stress system will be buffered a bit. It will be dampened down a bit. It will be slowed down. So that's very much beneficial. Research has been done, for example, where they present stressful situations to participants that are in the meantime in a brain scan and their brain is active. Their alarm signals are blaring. The sirens are blaring in their brain. But when they are holding the hand of someone, when they are holding someone's hand, their stress system is less active. Their brain is a bit more calm. And when that hand is somebody they love, somebody near to them, somebody close to them, that effect is even stronger. So social support can really help alleviate stress. And this is difficult for us humans to recognize sometimes. Even the author himself, he is very open about it. He kind of opens the book of his own life and he tells us that when he has a very stressful workday, it was always very hard for him to realize that actually sitting in the sofa with his family would calm him down. What he would normally think was like, no, I'm gonna worry about it a bit more on myself in my office at home. I'm not gonna bother them with it and I don't need that social support right now. I don't have the energy for it. But after a while, he started realizing that getting into that sofa and watching the television with his family is actually the best thing he can do to alleviate his stress. And that's one of those things, at that moment, at that specific time point, coming home from work, feeling stressed, you have two options. Go into your office and worry on your own. Go to your family and experience social support and alleviate your stress and stop worrying. And that's what he calls intersection moments. An intersection between choosing like, am I gonna continue worrying and continuing down that narrowing tunnel vision road into a negative spiral, or am I gonna go the other way? Am I gonna get unhooked from my pathology, from my worrying, and actually head towards social support and towards maybe a more valuable life? It's very similar to something like a choice point that Russ Harris in the ACT school of therapy talks about. A very interesting remark also made at the end of this little subheader of this chapter is that worrying is actually language. Language and our language capacities, our communicative capacities are of course what makes us strong as a species, also what kind of separates us from other animals. We have this intense, vast, well thought out system of communicating with each other through language, like I'm doing to you right now. But worrying is also language inside of your head. Our capacity of producing and understanding language is amazing, but people with a high score on neuroticism might use it in a bad way, in a bad manner, in a detrimental manner to their mental health. Subheader 3. What is piekeren eigenlijk? What is worrying actually? And it can basically be summarized in 3 points. Worrying is repetitive thinking, and really like repetitive, so time after time and time again about something negative. It's also a form of thought that you can poorly control. You are most of the time just overwhelmed with your worrying and you can't just decide from one second to another like I want to stop. And then third of all, it is unproductive. It doesn't bring you closer to the actual solution of your problems. So repetitive negative thoughts, out of your control, unproductive. That's what worrying is all about. And a small remark here about that second part. Do you remember what it was, the second part? That's right. You don't have control over it. Is Wagner's research. Very interesting research. You might have all heard about the white bear paradigm, the white bear research. We can do it right now. It's a very easy experiment to do together. Don't think about the white bear right now. Did I get you? You're all thinking about white bears, right? And that's exactly what he tries to emphasize. Like, trying to be in control of your thoughts often worsens the situation, and makes you think more about the exact thing you are trying to get rid of, you are trying to push away. One more time, because it's very important to know what worrying is before we learn about how to actually deal with it. Repetitive negative thoughts or rechewing information. Ruminating is also often used as a term, more specifically for worrying in depression, but that literally means to rechew something. Repetitive negative thoughts, not having control over it, it's out of your control. It's let loose and you can't put a chain on it, you can't put a leash on it. Unproductive. It doesn't actually bring you closer because you're thinking about, oh, why did it happen? And what if this happens? And what if this happens in the future? But what happens if I don't do this and if I'm not able to? And you're thinking about all these negative scenarios in the future, but they're not actually happening. And still they're causing you so much turmoil internally. So it's unproductive. Subheader 4. Ha, daar gaat het weer. Here it goes again. In a lot of psychopathology, in a lot of mental illness and stuff, there are feelings of really being glued together to your problem. You and the problem being one. You are one entity. It is rusted inside of you. It is a part of you. You are stuck in it and you lose yourself in it. That's why it helps to really explicitly put a name onto your problem. Because explicitly putting a name onto something already creates kind of a distance. Right? It already creates kind of a distance between you and the thing you named. What we're trying to do is make an object out of this annoying, out of this negative thought or feeling. And making an object out of it makes it possible for you to put it on a table in front of you. Look at it together with your therapist. Like, yeah, there's my worrying. You can describe what color it has. Like, yeah, it's this very bright red because it always feels like this alarm signal, this siren blaring in my head. It's this bright red object and it's not round. It's not a nice sphere because that would maybe feel like it's just there in my brain rolling around slowly. No, it's something with a lot of spikes. It's very spiky, very sharp on all edges because I always feel like it makes tears in the inside of my brain. Is it hot or cold? Is it hard or soft? It's something very hard. It scrapes along. And it's warm because it feels like scorching sometimes. It's so intense in my brain, this worrying in the back of my mind, that it feels like it scorches my brain. And that's beautiful. That's such a nice exercise to do with your clients together. This is really one of the first true exercises you can do with a client about worrying. Try to create a bit of distance. Try to have your client put it on the table so that you can both in a curious, playful and really open manner look at it in your session together. And you realize, right, now you're looking at it on the table. It's no longer inside of the client. It's no longer fused with your client. And fusion is another term that Filip Raes took from acceptance and commitment therapy. It's also something Russ Harris talks about a lot. And it's one of the main pillars of acceptance and commitment therapy, or well, diffusion is. So the antidote to fusion. And a main part about diffusion is gaining distance from your problem. Not from the intention of actually pushing it away and removing it. That's not what you want to do. You want to do it open, curious, playfully, but from the intention of just not being fused with your thoughts anymore and seeing them for what they are. They are just thoughts. And that's why the subtitle here is, there it is again. That's exactly what you can do when you notice you are worrying. There's my worrying again. Or you can just say, I'm worrying. Or you can even give it a specific person's name. Like, oh, there's old Gertrude again in the back of my mind. That can help you create distance. Another small exercise you can do, or your client can do, is to say it 10 times in a very, very different manner each time. Your worrying thought, talking about that worrying thought that is, for example, oh, I still need to put out the trash. Oh, I still need to put out the trash. Oh, I still need to put out the trash. Oh, damn, I still need to put out the trash. You know? Different manners. You can already feel like you're creating this distance. You're taking away the power from the worrying thoughts, and that's very important. Final subheader, een vorm van vermijding. It's a form of avoidance. Something we already talked about already, right? Worrying is a form of avoidance. You're not actually getting closer to the solution of your problem or to take active steps to get closer to that solution. Worrying is that feeling of staying in bed instead of going for a run because it's cold outside. Worrying is that not talking to a stranger even though you noticed he dropped his handkerchief on the ground, but you just feel like, oh, maybe he won't know my intentions and he would think I'm bothering him and he will get angry. Worrying is not going bungee jumping together with your friends because you feel scared. Well, that's maybe a bit of an extreme example. Worrying is not going out for drinks with your friend because you're scared that you won't have anything to talk about and that he will find you awkward and annoying, and that's worrying, right? And that is avoidance. At the short term, it seems to be very beneficial for us because it alleviates our stress a little bit. Worrying makes you feel like you are dealing with your problem, and therefore it makes you feel like your problem is a bit less impactful on your life. But in the long term, it's actually detrimental. Detrimental to our problems and their existence because they will keep on existing, and detrimental to our mental health as well. In the short term, worrying feels like, yeah, I'm thinking about solutions, I'm thinking about how to gain new insights, I'm really working on the problem, but in reality, you're not. And that's why I want to end off, because the thing you end off with often sticks the most in people, the metaphor of the treadmill. Worrying is like a treadmill. You feel like you're running, you're doing all this movement, you're running really fast and you're exhausted mentally and physically just from running on this treadmill. And when you then look around after running, you're still in the same spot. That's exactly what worrying is. You feel like you are actively dealing with stuff, but in reality, you are just staying in the same space, in the same little location, and you're not getting closer to solutions at all. Create distance from that worrying. Create distance from it in a mindful way, not with the intention of pushing it away, of getting rid of it, but of looking at it. Put it on the table, try to describe it, say it in funny ways, try to just objectify it. And the worrying we are trying to objectify, one more time for good measure, repetitive negative thoughts, you don't have any control over it, it's unproductive. Next episode, chapter 2, action, action, action. And I don't think he's talking about creating movies, but I think he's talking about actual behavior. And you getting on the road, going for that run, talking to that stranger to make sure that he can still clear out his nose proficiently in the future, and going for drinks with your friends, or even bungee jumping if you're a crazy person like that. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.